Okay, so let's start off today by going through the frequently made mistakes I've seen from the assignment 5 submissions I've reviewed to this point. Assignment 5 is due on Friday. The initial submission is due Friday. About 7 people have submitted their code for review, and this is what I've seen so far. So first of all, make sure you put the call to count before the call to on error return, although it probably doesn't matter all that much. It just is the way that the tests are expecting it to be, and it also makes a bit more sense. Also, don't return 0 here. Return the result of whatever crawl page async returns, because that's the whole point of this thing, is to give back the number of images that were traversed and downloaded and transformed and so on. Let's move down to crawl page async. So first and foremost, don't use call and manage blocker here. There are 2 reasons for that. Number one, if you look at the implementation, it's a no-op, so it's not helping you, and so there's no need to call it. Secondly, this particular code is not using the Java fork join pool, the common fork join pool, so there's no need to use this mechanism at all. It's using a different scheduling scheme and different thread pools that is provided by RxJava and the I/O scheduler. We'll talk about that in a second. Secondly, once you get rid of call and manage blocker, you can replace the use of a Lambda expression with a method reference. So make sure you get in the habit of doing that. The tests don't check for that because of limitations with using mocking for testing, but it's an important thing to do. Down here, don't use a cast and don't use flowable just pass in the page. And secondly, don't increment depth here. Depth does, in fact, need to be incremented, but it does not need to be incremented there. It needs to be incremented further down. And if you increment it here, then you have to decrement it elsewhere, which is confusing. Let's take a look at images on page links async. So first of all, make sure you take a careful look at the various get page elements methods that exist, and you want to use the one that's going to return page elements as string objects as opposed to returning them in some other format, in which case you have to do some other stuff. Also, make sure that you put the run-on call right after parallel. When you do parallel, that, of course, returns a parallel flowable. And then at that point, you call run-on to indicate what scheduler to use. And so you need to put that right after that. Otherwise, it won't run on the right scheduler. Down here, if you make the other change that I just talked about in order to be able to have the get page elements returned as strings, then in that particular case, you do not need to worry about doing the string value of conversion. That's, again, unnecessary. And then here is the place where you have to do something important to depth. Pretty obvious what you have to do, but I won't say it, so I don't want to spoil the learning experience, but you need to do something there with depth, and that's where that belongs. Another problem here, in addition to having run-on in the wrong place, is this is also using the wrong scheduler. So if you go back and rewatch the video from 2 classes ago, I think it was last Wednesday, where I walked through a potpourri of RxJava flowable, parallel flowable, observable, and so on operators, you'll see what I talked about as the scheduler to use. Make sure to use that scheduler. Do not use any other scheduler here. Definitely don't use the common pool one. Look down here, images on page async. Again, make sure that you call run-on right after .parallel. Every single example should have shown it that way, so I'm not sure why there'd be a temptation to do it this way, but make sure you do it the right way. Don't be using RxUtils, blah, 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 blah. Use the appropriate operations that you need to do here. In particular, what you need to do is you need to call map not null from within compose, and then passing in the appropriate parameters to map not null. Basically, what compose does is it lets you write your own custom intermediate operators or operators that occur before the terminal operation, and that's where you're going to have to do that. Down here, don't be passing in manage blocker download image. That doesn't belong there. I'm not really even sure where that's coming from, honestly, but maybe it was overloaded. Or maybe it's a method that's going to be defined as a no-op in the superclass to this, the image crawler superclass. That doesn't go in there. Manage blockers only intended to be used with the common fork join pool. We don't want to be using the common fork join pool. Don't use that method. Once again, passing in the wrong scheduler. Please rewatch the video to see which scheduler to use. And by the way, a bunch of people, for some strange reason, seem to be passing in the trampoline scheduler. Do not use the trampoline scheduler. Do not use the compute scheduler. Use the scheduler we talked about in class last time, because we're doing things that involve I/O, either reading from a socket or writing to a file. And then let's see, down here, so don't use the wrong scheduler. Again, reiterating that point. And then finally, you need to use compose. Whoops. You need to use compose with the appropriate call here. It's not map, not null. It's the one that you might expect to use here, given that we're transforming things. You need to use compose there. Why do we need to use compose? We need to use compose here because we need to be able to deal with nulls that may be coming out. So again, figure out what you need to put. It might be map, not null, but look at the code, figure out what you need to do. OK, so that is the walkthrough of frequently made mistakes that I've seen to this point. Please make sure, if you have not submitted your code for review yet, for your official review yet, that you take a look at this video and you address these issues prior to submitting your code, which is due on Friday.